I'm Jon and I'm with my great friend Yuval Laor. We're going to talk. We're going to slag off Richard Dawkins. Let's be honest about this, because heck, we need the audience, and we're going to start with this notion of the meme. And
Yes.
would you like to open the conversation on, the meme is the idea that ideas pass in the same way that genes pass, selfish
Or
memes. And
genes are supposed to pass.
yeah, are supposed to pass according to
Yeah.
the mythological religion of Richard Dawkins. So it's
Well,
surprising,
I
really,
mean,
that
when
religious folk haven't gone back to him and said, your ideas about evolution are nonsense, mate. They're way out of date. But so it goes. So a meme is the idea that you've got some little thing that's passing. It's never made any sense to me. I don't know
no, I mean
what he's talking about.
I think it makes kind of sense, and I think that reality could have been like that. It's just that it turned out not to.
It wasn't.
The idea, first of all, the way we use the word meme today, which refers to something, an internet little message that is a picture that's supposed to be witty and creative.
And it's passed around the internet.
And it's passed around the internet, yeah. But that is very, very different than what the original formulation of meme.
It's very important to point that out. I got into an argument with Spike where I was basically she was wanting to put memes on the internet. I'm like, it's a stupid idea, memes. She had to explain to me what it meant. That's what happens when you're old, don't understand the world around you.
So the meme, which is it's Richard Dawkins proposed it in like 2-3 pages at the end of the extended phenotype from 1982, and I think, but Richard Dawkins never writes about it and rarely talks about it. So it's sort of he proposed it, but he never argued for it properly, or so. It's not. It's.
I saw a documentary just a few months ago where somebody did interview him about the meme.
Mm-hmm.
It was somebody who was actually talking about the meme in the sense of, in the way it's used in the internet. And he's a professor who was seeking to teach us all how to make something go viral, which I think is pretty much what the program was called. And which is very interesting. But he sits down with Richard Dawkins, and yet I got thoroughly confused. I had no idea how what Richard Dawkins was putting forward as an idea would simply be, some message that's passed on, for which we don't really need a new word. But that's the word, just in the way that spam went from Monty Python to email, it's just that way.
Yeah.
It wasn't the spiced processed meat. But,
yeah. Wow. The way Richard Dawkins talks about meme is he thinks that there are things that replicate and things that don't replicate. So
I can replicate that, man.
In reality, whenever you say that something replicates, when you look closely enough, it gets reconstructed. It doesn't actually get copied. But with this idea that culture can be described as a set of replicators, which are the memes, there's a problem with creativity, right? Where does a new meme come from? Because it's all about replication. And so the internet memes, which are all creativity, they are something that wasn't before. They are something that when you create a meme, you create it. You don't copy. But so that sort of goes against the essence. Now there are, but in general, the memetics project, this idea, and I don't think that culture can be reduced to nuggets that replicate.
No, I mean, where would Rembrandt have come from? Where would Da Vinci have come from? How could you suddenly be able to do those things,
Yeah.
which had never been
And
done before? Or Van
so
Eyck.
the if we look about to where memetics come from, the memetics, in a way, it is a Platonic project. So Plato tells us that if you want to understand how to create a just city, you need to look at the soul, and that the city and the soul would mirror each other, right? So the small scale and the large scale would have sort of a parallel to them. Now, that is something that can sometimes happen, right? Because hurricanes look like galaxies, and I mean, we have that dynamic in chaos theory sometimes, but you need to argue why. But for the memetics, the meme and the gene, the idea that they replicate each other, so that there's some kind of an algorithm in biology, and for some reason the same algorithm works also to explain culture. Now, this would be fine. It would be a good step towards that argument if this kind of gene as replicator was a reality in biology, and it's not.
Well,
The
explain that. Explain that. Go to that
so
point. Yeah.
When Richard Dawkins wrote The Selfish Gene in 1976, he said that the word selfish, that was a metaphor. So that's, he didn't mean that he's literally, but what biologists think today is that the gene is the metaphor. um, and there is no agreed upon definition of a gene.
Okay.
There are general things that sort of replicate, but when you look closer, things are a lot more complicated. The DNA in general is a read-write system, not a read-only system, and it just, things are a lot more complicated. And in reality, we know that traits come about from a network of genes, so a combination of genes.
Yeah.
And for Richard Dawkins, who is strongly opposed to group selection, right? So group selection, for him, he thinks that cannot happen. And because of that, for him, you cannot have a group of genes that get selected together. There needs to be the level of the selection needs to be the gene himself. Now, the idea that one gene, one trait, this correspondence is very, very problematic based on what we see. We know that it can sometimes be that the difference in one gene makes the difference in the trait, but it still doesn't mean that that trait is the result of that one gene.
No, and I mean, I think since the Genome Project, the hopes for the Genome Project was so high that so little has directly come from it in finding single gene diseases. There are some things which is great, but there was such an anticipation. And the point is that once you've got two or more things interacting, the complexity of the relationship increases exponentially. And that it's not just a little biological blob with a blueprint in it that's copying itself. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated. But
that was an ironic use of the word "bit," by the way.
So if you look at where new creativity comes in the genetic schema that Richard Dawkins describes, where the only source of new genes is mutations, and he insists that mutations are random, and as such, we don't need to discuss them too much because they're just random. But we know today that the mutations are not random, not in time, because when an animal or a plant is doing bad, it increases the rate of mutation. Also, the mutation is not random in space. There are certain places in the genome that are prone to mutations.
Mm.
and others that are not.
Yeah.
And you have not in size. Apparently, the mutations that we get are of a certain size. And in general, we do know that there are animals that haven't changed in hundreds of millions of years. There's
Mm.
sharks that, and so apparently they were able to not change too much.
Mm.
Now,
their genes just weren't selfish enough. Can I say? Or maybe they were too selfish, their genes, so they haven't had to adapt or accept to anything because they're fitted to their environment, as Herbert Spencer would have.
So the thought of Charles Darwin, when you have a reproduction, the father and the mother actually mix. And because they mix, the baby is a mixture of the two. Now, once Mendel came about and said, well, you either get a gene from this side or a gene from that side, and then later people like Richard Dawkins said that there's one gene to one trait correspondence. There's a gene for this and gene for that. Then suddenly the father and the mother do not mix. Right? So you either got your father's gene or your mother's gene, because that's how you get a gene. But when we found out, not found out, but when it was affirmed, because people always suspected it, that traits are the product of many genes, then the father and the mother's mixing comes back.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that Richard Dawkins talks, and I have here a book someone wrote about this. He thinks that Darwinism is in a way opposed to Lamarckianism.
Yeah.
So
but then epigenetics comes into the picture, and what are we going to do now?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, Charles Darwin was a Lamarckian.
Yeah, absolutely.
He thought, it's Weismann later in the century that changes. But
Wallace and Darwin, and we must put Wallace into this conversation.
Yeah.
Both believe that what was used to be called the Darwin-Wallace theory of evolution.
So there's this book by. Now, she says at the very beginning of the book, she called the book The Selfish Genius, and it's just because it's a play on Richard Dawkins' book. She doesn't think that he's selfish.
No, he's a lovely man. He's a lovely man.
Yeah. And politically, I agree with a lot of stuff that he says. Not everything, but a lot of it.
Yeah.
So this book, how Richard Dawkins rewrote Darwin's legacy, is about him presenting Darwinism in a way that assumes this kind of this genetic assumption, and the parents not etc. So in the genetic scheme, you only get new stuff from random mutations because of whatever, sunlight or something. But the next step is to say, okay, so if all of biology can be reduced to genes, and of course that's not true, but that is the way some people used to think about it. Memetics was a project to do the same to culture. And now, for that, the unit of the replicator, which is, for example, a joke or a song or a word or something that gets replicated. Now, already at the beginning, there's problems because the version of Little Red Riding Hood in my head and the version in your head are not the same version. There is a certain attractor that they both, hover around, which is the original Grimm Brothers story. But each one of it's not a replicator. When I say the story to someone else, the version in their head would not be the same as the version in my head. So there's a problem.
Cookie cutter transferal of material.
Yeah, which is sort of the assumption in memetics theory. so that's one problem, and that problem actually can be solved, and that was in a theory called the epidemiology of representations by Sperber. But so that is a more sophisticated, but that is still a problem. There are many other problems still. For example, the the assumption is that culture, that the meme is that it doesn't interact in a complex way with other things, right? So the idea that if I listen to a joke, which is the meme, right? So in memetics, the joke is the meme, it's the replicator.
Yep.
It is also selfish, like the gene. It tries to manipulate me to create more copies of it by retelling the joke or singing the song or whatever it is. And so I'm the vehicle, and the meme is not really it doesn't get affected by the vehicle, it's and that because of that you can do the all else being equal kind of arguments, where you say, if the meme was like that, then it would have spread like this. So it has a root, and the whole story works as a story. It could have happened that way, but the problem is that the meme is not an independent variable in any way. When I hear a joke and I hear the Pope tell it to me, when I tell a child tell me to me, if I'm drunk when I hear it, if I'm tired when I hear it, if I speak the language that it's told in or not, if I'm a 5-year-old, if I'm 15-year-old, all of those things affect the interaction between the meme and me. Right? So this cultural nugget is not in any way independent. You cannot do the all else being equal. It's, let's say all the jokes I know, all else being equal, I speak a different language. There will be, all the interaction between how we think and us, right? If they say, if you want to show the effect of matter over mind, drink a glass of vodka, and you'll notice that there's a difference. And to say that a meme would, the mimetic dynamics and how the memes spread in a society where people drink alcohol might be very different than a society where people don't drink alcohol, or whatever. And so that's one problem with memetics. Another problem with memetics is the problem of authority, right? If I hear my neighbor or some person on the street tell me whatever, I might ignore it. But if I'm a devout Catholic and the Pope tells me the exact same thing, I will not ignore it. So the same meme can come from one source or from another source.
You would be wondering how it was.
Big difference.
You would be wondering how it was that your neighbor knew the Pope was going to say that.
Yeah.
Possibly.
So an example, in memetics, if you would ask why is England Protestant, you would say, well, the ideas of Protestantism were battling the ideas of Catholicism in the 16th, 17th centuries, and apparently the memes of Protestantism won, and that's what happened. But any historian would tell you that no, it's because Bloody Mary died of influenza, so England is Protestant. It's once you have authority, once you have one person who is in a position to decide for a lot of other people what they think, the dynamics of memetics just don't work. Now, one of the things, so you could say that now the theory of memetics claims that it is an explanation of all culture, right? So all of culture can be reduced to memes. But that obviously doesn't work, right? That's but some aspects of culture actually can function that way in artificial situations. So, for example, knowledge of technological, whatever, a knowledge of abstract chemistry and things like that, which really doesn't interact too much, or technological knowledge that can spread the way people imagine memes spread. So that can happen.
Yeah, true.
But you shouldn't mistake that with thinking that you have explained.
Yeah, a chemical formula is a chemical formula. It can be passed to somebody else, and they will make it in the same way, and on we go.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's that's a far cry from squashing everything into the meme box, and it's appalling that this idea has been so powerful for so long, when the biology no longer supports it. No, it's gone. But he's still out. He's still out there. Charming as
well. And there's nothing against him particularly, or
I don't like his hair very much.
and the real problematic stuff is what happens, and this is not him, but people who do rely on memetics, like, for example, Sam Harris, and maybe Richard Dawkins also guilty of this. But once you believe in memetics, when you believe that culture is a collection of ideas that a person believes in, that misunderstanding of culture can actually lead to bad stuff. For example, Sam Harris would tell you that Islam is bad, and the reason it's bad is because it's a collection of bad ideas. And if you look at their holy books that they believe in, there's some bad ideas in there, and if you ask them about them, they say that it's true. But that takes the memetics assumption that culture is a set of ideas, and you behave based on the ideas that you believe are true.
So all Christians give all of their money to the poor. It's well known.
Yeah, and they all turn the other cheek. That's why you can never have capitalism in a Christian society, because everybody just gives all their capital, and that's why you can't have a Christian military, because they all turn the other cheek. Now that is the ability to ignore central tenets that you believe in, right? And sometimes without even noticing it, and certainly without it being strange to anybody. Everybody knows it's completely normal that there are rich Christian people. But the other half of the story is that you can be a Christian, a devout Christian, that doesn't know what's in the Bible. You can believe with all your heart in ideas that you don't know what they are, and you can ignore the central ideas of your faith that you do know what they are. And the thing is, if you did a poll of devout Christians and you ask them how, or just any Christians, if you identify as a Christian, should you follow the Bible? And you'll get a very, very high percentage. And if you ask those,
there's a simple question. If your right eye offends you, do you pluck it out? And if your right hand offends you, do you cut it off? Have either of them ever offended you in any way? Have you done the right thing? No. Yeah. The meme in this case will not be passed on. What will be passed on is generally a set of traditions that might last a couple of 100 years until the next lot come along. So that there's just looking at the interpretation of the Bible. This amazing thought we took. You mentioned the beginning of Protestantism in the start of the 16th century, which is largely fueled by what a wild thought. Churches full of people listening to the Bible being declaimed from the Vulgate in Latin, and they don't understand a word of it. And they sit there every Sunday and sit through a couple of hours of this, and that's your day off. I mean, So they really have nowhere, and then suddenly it starts being read in English.
Now, the thing is that if you ask Christians, how many of you do you think should turn the other cheek when smitten? You'll get a very high percentage saying yes.
7 and 77 times 7, I think, is the mathematical number given by Jesus. That's how many times you have to turn your cheek.
So when people say, well, you know, when you did a poll of Muslims, how many say that you should kill the infidels, and you got a high percentage?
Well, how many have thrown homosexuals off mountainsides? I mean, ISIS did. They chucked them out of.
Yeah, of course.
But the majority of the Muslim world actually steps aside from that particular strange idea. But you shall not suffer a witch to live had quite an effect on Christendom.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and Judaism, of course.
But it was a way of getting rid of the elderly members of the population, so it had a good mimetic reason.
Yeah, so the mimetic can lead some people for a certain kind of cultural determinism in a way that a selfish gene thinking of biology can lead some people to think of genetic determinism.
Which is the equivalent of Presbyterian fatalism, basically. Yeah, but scientifically it works out the same way. It's all written in the Book of Life. There's nothing you can do about it.
There you go. Yeah.
My dad used to tell me that, you know, if he'd tell me off, he said to me that everything's genetic, and it was one of his standard phrases. You'd hear it frequently. So whenever he told me off, I'd look at him and say, everything's genetic. And he'd laugh, and that was the end of that.
And then it's his fault because he's
he accepted
half your genes.
He was very nice.
It's either your fault or mom's fault, you know. Go tell her why she gave me that gene, you know.
I can't help it.
Yeah, but so if you take this genetic determinism and memetics brings with it a kind of cultural determinism, but it's not culture the way culture really is, where you're affected by other people's behaviors and norms, and you know, the people who know that they are living contradictions, they know that they don't turn the other cheek, you know, when they
do cast the first stone.
The idea that our behavior is determined by our beliefs, and our beliefs are replicators, that it just doesn't work, and basing any theory of culture and any political arguments and which people like Sam Harris do, I think it's a complete it's very dangerous and very wrong, and it's rooted in a kind of a misunderstanding of biology, and the assumption that there will be this platonic symmetry between the gene and the mean.
I think that's fair enough. But I think we've probably covered the topic, and I thank you very much for it. This is my friend Yuval Laor, who's very clever, and I'm Jon Atack, and we hope to see you again soon. And that's your day off.